They say truth sets you free, but freedom is not always a gift. Sometimes it's a blade, cold, sharp, and irreversible. You were never meant to hear what I'm about to say. Not because it's unimportant, but because it's forbidden. Because once you know, really know, there's no going back. The veil is torn, the illusion crumbles. The world you thought was built on facts and reason begins to rot in your hands. And the truth beneath? It's older than science, older than scripture, older than any empire. It whispers through bloodlines and cracks in the earth. And it started in this case with two little girls. Pine Hollow was not chosen by accident. Remote settlements don't just happen. They're seeded, placed like forgotten chess pieces by forces that move through generations. What we call isolation is sometimes containment, control, surveillance masked as obscurity. You think the government was watching in 1834? No, but someone was. Someone always is. And Pine Hollow, nestled in the folds of eastern Kentucky, was never meant to be found. That church, the one built over secrets and silence, was not sacred ground. It was a vault. The Morrison Twins didn't expose it. They triggered it. Let's be clear, we are not talking about psychic phenomena. This is not ESP or some fluke of quantum brainwaves. These girls didn't see secrets. They accessed something buried. They walked into a memory that wasn't theirs and pulled out truths no human should have known. But it wasn't their gift that mattered. It was their bloodline. Sarah Morrison, their mother, was not just a woman with the second sight. She descended from a line of women who were systematically erased from American historical records after 1783. Midwives, herbalists, visionaries, and threats. These women were silenced because they remembered and passed that memory down through flesh, through daughters, through dreams. So when Rachel and Rebecca stood in that church, they didn't just shatter social order, they violated something older, the compact of silence that communities like Pine Hollow were built to protect. And that's where it begins. Not with witches, not with ghosts, but with ancient memory and blood that refuses to forget. You see, memory isn't just personal, it's territorial. It clings to places, infects the soil, saturates the walls. When the Morrison twins arrived, they didn't bring something new. They awakened something ancient, something that had been waiting, dormant, patient, beneath floorboards and foundations. Pastor Phillips didn't preach that night. He sat at his desk, staring at the candle flame until it blurred into a single, blinding void. His faith was collapsing, not because of the twins, but because deep down he knew. He had always known. The blood beneath the altar, the guilt etched into the eyes of the elders, the things left out of the church's official records. And what the girls revealed wasn't the worst of it. It was just the beginning. Because after the Sunday revelations, the dreams spread, not just to the twins, but to others. Old Martha Whitfield saw her dead husband in the mirror. Dr. Hayes heard knocking behind the walls of his cabin, 3 knocks, always at midnight, and Samuel Turner. He was found at dawn, kneeling in the cemetery, muttering apologies to names on gravestones that had been wiped clean a decade ago. Something had been unlocked, and here's the part no one talks about. Knowledge spreads like infection. You think learning the truth makes you stronger? Sometimes it just opens the door for something else to come through. The twins weren't prophets. They were conduits. Rachel began sleepwalking, always toward the church. Rebecca stopped eating, claiming the food tasted like ash. And when Pastor Phillips confronted Ezekiel Morrison, demanding to know what was happening to his daughters, the preacher finally told him what Sarah had warned him the day before she died. They don't just see, they're seen. Because the knowledge inside them wasn't passive, it wanted out. And if you're still listening, good. You're not like the others. You're starting to remember too. Shadows don't just haunt the past. Sometimes they reach forward. By the 3rd day, Pine Hollow was unraveling. The fog that rolled down from the hills never lifted that morning. It clung to the town like a suffocating presence, thicker than smoke, yet carrying no scent. Cattle refused to leave their barns. Birds fell silent, and the children, those who hadn't fallen sick, spoke in their sleep, whispering names that hadn't been heard aloud in years. Something ancient had stirred, and now it was listening. Pastor Phillips found himself praying, not for wisdom, but for protection. He wasn't sure from what. Not demons, not spirits, not anything from Scripture. This wasn't supernatural in the way he'd been taught to understand it. It was ancestral. Rebecca and Rachel didn't speak that morning. They sat by the fire, unmoving, their eyes distant, like soldiers after battle. When he finally asked Rachel if she wanted breakfast, she didn't answer. Instead, she looked up slowly and said, "It's under the tree, the one with no shadow." He didn't know what she meant, not yet, but he felt it. The sensation that something understood more than he ever could. That this wasn't madness. This was remembrance. Not his, but the land's, the air's, the memory of the place itself. It was remembering what the people tried to bury. Later that afternoon, a boy named Caleb ventured behind the church, chasing a missing goat. He found the tree, an old birch, unnaturally twisted, with gnarled branches that reached in all directions except one. On that side, the ground was scorched. Dead leaves didn't gather there. No insects, no birdsong, just silence. And beneath the roots, barely exposed by recent rain, was the corner of a wooden box. They pried it free with trembling hands. Inside, a collection of letters stained with age and blood. Letters written in the same delicate hand, all signed by Hope Whitman. Each one addressed to a different name, each one describing a different betrayal. It wasn't just one man who had silenced the Whitman family. It had been a vote, a decision made in fear, a covenant sealed in blood. You think justice is about truth? No. Truth is currency, and in 1834, the cost of truth was silence, paid in full by a family who dared to speak against the congregation's darkest sin. Now listen closely. Comment, "I remember the root and the silence" twice below. Once for the story, once for your awakening, because now you're part of it. The letters ignited a chain reaction that could not be undone. Each one was dated weeks before the supposed house fire that claimed the Whitman family. Each described mounting fear, threats whispered through doors, stares from neighbors once trusted, a growing sense that Mary Whitman's herbal remedies and midwifery had crossed an invisible line. She had saved lives, treated wounds doctors ignored, and questioned the authority of the church when children started dying from fevers she'd warned them about. The final letter was not a farewell. It was a warning. "They do not fear death," she wrote. "They fear memory. They fear the light we carry. They fear the ones who dream." Pastor Phillips read those words aloud in his study, his hands trembling, his throat dry. The room seemed to darken around him, though the lamps burned bright. Because suddenly everything made sense. The twins weren't cursed, they were called. This wasn't random, it was lineage, memory encoded in blood, passed from one generation of truth bearers to the next. Not witches, not seers, witnesses. And Pine Hollow was built on the graves of the silenced. Ezekiel Morrison stood behind the pastor as he read, silent, grim. When Phillips turned to him seeking answers, all Ezekiel said was, "You asked what kind of gift they have, but it's not a gift, it's a reckoning." That night, Rachel spoke in her sleep. Everyone in the Phillips house heard it, even the neighbors, who would later swear the child's voice sounded like someone far older, far colder. She named the 12 elders who had voted to kill the Whitmans. She named their children, and their children's children. 7 of those descendants still lived in Pine Hollow. By dawn, 2 had already fled. You must understand, this wasn't fear of exposure, it was fear of awakening. Because when you live your entire life within a lie, the truth doesn't just threaten your reputation, it threatens your existence. The version of you that clung to the illusion begins to die. What rises in its place, that is what they fear. And here's the part that haunts. The girls never stopped dreaming. They dreamed of cities that hadn't been built yet, of fires that hadn't started, of voices calling out from beneath foundations across the country. And they kept whispering the same 3 words, "It's happening again." 3 days after the Morrison Twins arrived, Pine Hollow fell into what the town records would later call the quiet. No bells, no sermons, no gossip by the well. Just locked doors and shuttered windows. The people didn't speak, Not because they chose silence, but because silence had chosen them. It wrapped around the town like a noose. Fear was no longer emotional, it was structural. Rebecca stopped speaking altogether. She only stared. At people, at places, at things others couldn't see. And whenever she did, animals would begin to cry. Not bark, not hiss, but cry as if mourning something not yet lost. Rachel, too, was changing. Her dreams became longer, her body colder. She began drawing in the dirt with her finger, symbols no one understood, not crosses, not stars, symbols from a language not known but remembered. Pastor Phillips spent hours studying those patterns. Eventually, he found one in an ancient German theological text, smuggled from the old world. A protection rune used not to ward off evil, but to trap memory. Rachel was trying to hold it back, but it was already inside the town. The elders met in secret behind the granary, not to understand the girls, but to discuss how to remove them. They spoke in hushed tones, invoking old laws, claiming the welfare of the flock. They blamed Ezekiel, claiming he had bewitched them. They even accused Pastor Phillips of losing control. But deep down, they weren't trying to silence the girls. They were trying to survive the return of what they had buried. You see, memory, true memory, doesn't die. It's like a virus sealed in ice. You can pretend it's gone. You can rewrite the records. But once the ice melts, it spreads. And the Morrison Twins were fire in human form, melting the frozen guilt that Pine Hollow had worshipped as truth. And still the girls kept dreaming. That night, Rachel screamed in her sleep, a scream that wasn't hers. Everyone in the house woke at once, and when they rushed to her side, she whispered something that chilled the room to stillness. They're coming back for what was taken. Not revenge, balance. And in the dark corners of the town, where foundations creaked and walls whispered, something began to knock back. They tried to run. At dawn, 2 wagons were spotted leaving Pine Hollow, heading north without fanfare. No farewells, no blessings, just the hiss of wheels through cold mud and the wide eyes of children who didn't understand why their fathers gripped rifle barrels with white-knuckled fists. They weren't fleeing the twins, they were fleeing the return. Because once the past breathes, it hunts. Not like a beast, but like gravity. Slow, irresistible, and permanent. It doesn't chase you, it pulls. And those families, their names were on the letters. The descendants of the 12, the ones who made the vote. But running didn't save them. The Turner's wagon was found overturned by the ridge at dusk. No bodies, no blood. Just burnt soil where the wheels had stopped. The kind of burn that leaves no ash. The air above it hummed. Pastor Phillips was no longer leading prayers. He spent his days at the church alone, opening every hidden drawer, tearing up floorboards, digging beneath pews, searching not for evidence, but for proof of evil so deep it could only have been made righteous by denial. He found it. Beneath the altar was a cavity sealed with stone. Inside, a second box, older than the church itself, wrapped in animal hide bound with iron wire. Inside that box, bones, small, fragile, not 4, not 6, 2, child-sized, wrapped in cloth embroidered with the initials FW and HW, Faith and Hope Whitman. They had never left the church. They were built into it. Rachel stood in the doorway as the discovery was made. Her voice was soft, but the words struck like thunder. They asked for sanctuary. You gave them sacrifice. And that's when it changed. The house flies returned. The church bell began to ring on its own, always 13 times. And the dreams, they spread. Not just to the twins now. Everyone dreamed. Dreams of fire and confession, of chanting in an unknown tongue, of trees that bled, of women hanging upside down, eyes open, mouths sewn shut. The veil had thinned. And here's the truth no one dares speak. The girls weren't haunted. We were. They were just the mirror. And now the town could see itself for what it truly was. A monument to murder, a shrine of silence. And the silence had finally cracked. This is the final veil, not a conclusion, not a resolution, but the place where the fracture becomes form, and the silence reveals its source. Section 28 is not for the curious, it is for the changed. If you've made it here, you've already felt it. The skin-tightening awareness that the world you trusted was decorative. A beautifully stitched veil over a machine that doesn't care about comfort, only continuity, and now you're awake inside it. Do you remember what happened after Pine Hollow collapsed? You shouldn't, because that part was scrubbed. Every reference to the Morrison Twins was erased from church archives. Pastor Phillips's journal mysteriously vanished from the county records. The land was rezoned, sold, and eventually covered by a corporate livestock facility, one that conveniently sits atop lead-lined foundations. Signal blockers. To this day, no GPS works properly there. No birds nest nearby. No trees take root. But every 11 years on November 15th, power surges ripple through the region's grid. Faint, unexplained. And always followed by missing time reports within a 50-mile radius. The glyph shows up again, in dreams, in carved trees, in static-laced broadcasts. And those who see it, they begin to shed time like skin. They forget things that never happened. They remember things no one taught them. They begin speaking languages no one's heard in centuries. And some, they vanish, not taken, recalled. Because the glyph, Gufran, it wasn't just a symbol, it was a summoning key. Not summoning demons or spirits, but activating dormant sovereigns. People like you who carry fragments of the forbidden structure in their bones. You weren't meant to survive this story. You were meant to be reformatted by it. This entire script has been an initiation code. Every word, a realignment. Every phrase, a permission slip. Every section, a pressure test. And now at the final veil, you face one choice. Forget and return to the loop. Or embed the glyph and carry the signal forward. Because the system can silence a town, it can erase twins, it can rewrite archives, but it cannot delete a willing transmitter. That's what you are now. You're not just a man, you're a signal torch. So here, as we close, burn this into your memory. Truth is a system, and I am now part of its recursion. Say it, twice. Let it echo through the veil they tried to seal forever. Because now you know, the Morrison Twins never disappeared. They dispersed, and one of them is now speaking through you. The glyph lives, and so do you, but only if you choose it. This concludes the transmission, but the awakening just began.